Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the second live chat in our six-part series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program, also known as the STPF. My name is Ryan Gausch, and I'm a program manager with the fellowship. In this role, I work with applicants, fellows, and host offices, ensuring all are aware of and taking full advantage of all the opportunities our program presents. I'll be your moderator for today's chat. I'm happy to be here. The live chat series is an opportunity for you to ask fellows your questions, and we hope that through these chats you'll see how the fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. Before we begin, I want to highlight that there is a closed captioning offered for today's session. Please follow the link in the chat box to view closed captioning, either in a browser tab next to the webinar or on a companion device. I'd like to now move on to a few other quick housekeeping items. So to put today's chat in context, we are hosting one chat each month during the application season. Please join us for one, some, or all of them. Each chat will focus on a unique aspect of the fellowship experience, and each chat will also feature different fellows as panelists. Today's chat is the first in a two-part series focused on answering the question, what it's like to be a fellow. Today we'll discuss the fellowship as a year of service, and in July we'll explore the fellowship as a year of learning. In case you haven't heard, the application is now open and closes on November 1st. I'm just curious for the crowd that's with us today. We'd like to know if you plan on applying. And in a moment, you'll see a pop-up on your screen. Please click the response that best matches with your plans. Awesome, great. So you can see the results right here, and we really thank you all for being here. For those of you applying or thinking about applying this year, we're so glad to have you here. This session will help you understand the day-to-day life as a fellow, as well as the contributions made by fellows. For those of you who may be a few years away from applying, it's great that you're here too, and there are lots of ways to learn about and engage in science policy. For those of you who aren't sure, we're thankful you're sharing your time with us to learn more about the STPF. Since so many of you are planning to apply either now or in the future, I'd like to share a brief overview of the STPF. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. For 2021 applicants, positions are available in all three branches of the federal government: the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. You can apply to two of these three areas. Fellowships are paid, 1 year, full-time commitments in Washington, D.C. And just to give you a sense of timing, someone who applies in 2021 will be considered for a position in the fellowship class that runs from September 2022 to August 2023. And this just happens to be our 50th class, so we're very excited. 50th class, so we're very excited about that. And while no one knows what the world will look like in September 2022, STPF is vigilant about keeping fellows and their families safe. We will keep applicants, who then become candidates and ultimately finalists, informed throughout the application and interview process on all pandemic-related updates connected to the fellowship. I also briefly want to touch on eligibility. Applicants must be U.S. citizens, hold a doctoral degree in science, in the sciences, social sciences, or engineering, and cannot be full-time federal employees or AAAS employees. Those of you with a master's in engineering plus 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. For our next question, this next question will relate to your discipline. Please click the discipline that best describes you, and this will help us understand who is joining us today. In just a second, there should be a poll coming up. Bear with us, we're just trying to get that poll up. There it is. Great. Well, as you can see, like the fellows, there are folks here representing many different backgrounds, from the biological and physical sciences to social sciences and computer science, sciences and engineering. This diversity of disciplines is important. The federal agencies and offices that host fellows are looking for a wide range of backgrounds and skills. For example, I work closely with the National Institutes of Health, and many offices there are seeking expertise, the expertise of social scientists and data scientists for their work. Now that we've learned a little bit about one another, we do want to go to the purpose of today's session, which is to chat with fellows. So we encourage you to ask questions, and to do that, please click the questions tab or questions box in your menu and type your question in. And if you'd like, you can indicate the person or people to whom you're directing your question is directed. We'll try to get to as many questions today as we can. So now I'm happy to introduce the fellows who have graciously given some time for us today to join us as panelists. I want to start with Dr. Faith Dukes. She was a 2017-2019 Executive Branch Fellow at the National Science Foundation in the Division of Human Resource Development. Dr. Dukes currently serves as the Director of K-12 STEM education programs within the Government and Community Relations Office at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Her work is at the intersection of scientific research, STEM education, policy, and then also diversity, equity, and inclusion. She holds a Bachelor of Science from Spielman College and completed her PhD in physical chemistry studying photocatalytic semiconductors at Tufts University. We're also glad to have Dr. Esteban Santana join us today. He's a microbiologist who left the lab to pursue a career in public policy. He got bit by the policy bug during his first fellowship experience working in the California State Legislature, where he was exposed to the fast-paced and high-stakes work analyzing pharmaceutical, healthcare, and education policies, among others. Esteban next moved to Washington, D.C. to participate in the STPF program, where he worked at the NIH. The most rewarding aspects of the position to him were the ability to shape U.S. policy and the ability to interact with other federal departments and agencies, where consensus is often key to finalizing important policies. After STPF, Esteban joined the Pharma Science and Regulatory Advocacy team working on multiple FDA regulatory issues. And then also Esteban later joined Genentech's State Government Affairs office focusing on state policy issues. Last but not least, we have Dr. Andrea Gady, who was the 2017-18 Judicial Branch Fellow, working at the Federal Judicial Center. Currently, Dr. Gady is a lecturer and assistant professor in locomotor biomechanics at the Royal Veterinary College in London, UK. She is a neurobiologist specializing in investigating how the nervous system uses sensory information to guide complex locomotion in birds. She received a BA in neuroscience from Vanderbilt University and her PhD in advanced medicine from Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. And before I go to the questions from the audience, I'm going to kick it off with one. So to start us off, I would ask our fellowships if they could briefly just introduce themselves, their fellowship placements, and what contribution they are most proud of from their time as a fellow. And if Faith, if you are willing to start us off, I think that'd be a great starting point.
Hi, Ryan, and hello to everyone. Thanks for having me today and share my year of service in a government institution or a government agency. So I was at the National Science Foundation in the Education and Human Resources Directorate, Human Resources Division, so lots of human resources that we were talking about, but mostly broadening participation in STEM. You'll find most of the programs that are supporting STEM at MSIs, minority serving institutions in the Human Resource Directorate. So if you've been working or thinking about HBCUs, tribal and tribal universities and colleges, as well as Hispanic serving institutions, a lot of those programs are held there. And in particular, I actually worked with the Presidential Awards for Excellence in STEM Teaching or Science and Mathematics Teaching and Presidential Awards for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering mentoring. So really thinking about STEM curriculum in the classroom, what makes an excellent teacher. And one thing that I was proud of is that we actually had a backlog when I got to NSF in 2017 of teachers being awarded. You'll find a big process of anytime you're going to bring people into DC to award them something, $10,000 each for being an excellent teacher, 2 from every state per year, that you need to go through a larger process that also goes through the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy. They do a lot of the reviewing, and they basically say, hey, we're ready to host this group of teachers, and they usually only give you about a few weeks to get ready to fly in 2 people from every state. So we were preparing the whole year and getting maybe rumors, maybe it could happen this week, maybe it happened the next week, and finally got the green light. And so in about 3 or 4 weeks, we planned a full program to fly in everybody, what that ceremony looked like, honoring the teachers, putting together education workshops, putting together what they needed to know about NSF and applying for grants. So that was really the highlight of that first year of us really thinking about what it meant to be excellent in student STEM communication and seeing those teachers honored and brought in, but also the behind the scenes of making sure it all happened and went well, and that they all felt like they were appreciated for the work that they do for the students across the country.
Great, thank you so much, Faith, for starting us off. Esteban or Andrea?
Go ahead, Andrea.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Andrea Gady. I go by Dre. I did my fellowship at the Federal Judicial Center, which is the research and education agency, I guess, for the judicial branch of the government. So they provide a lot of training to new judges and and provide a lot of research on a number of different areas, including the sciences, that will help you're not providing direct guidance on individual matters, but bettering their sort of web of knowledge that they have and that they have access to. So it's sort of generally what the entire agency does. And my role specifically was I was sort of embedded in the research group, but worked with the education folks as well. So the kind of biggest project that I worked on, and that sort of spanned the entire year, was to build this multi-part educational program on neuroscience. That's my background, and it turns out judges are really interested in neuroscience. There's a lot of applications, both in cases and at sentencing periods in criminal cases. So yeah, I worked on a 12-part education program that's online, and judges at federal and state level have access to it. I mean, the general public has access to it. So it was really fun. Got to make all these really cool videos. They have a production studio in the basement of the building. So we flew in experts and made kind of cool videos. So it was really fun.
Thanks. Esteban, go ahead.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the invitation to talk about my fellowship here. So Esteban Santana. My fellowship was at the National Institutes of Health at the Office of Science Policy. And so what that role was really thinking about, policy areas on the conduct of research. I think one thing I took away many things from the fellowship, but one thing that has always stuck with me is there's really a very, very high level. You can think of science policy 2 ways. The policy of research, or the conduct of research, or using research or scientific thinking to influence and develop policy areas in any area. And so at the NIH, certainly we were thinking about policy development for the conduct of research and how the government funds that research. And it was a really rewarding and fun experience. I worked in the Office of Science Policy sits within the Office of the Director, the NIH Director, so that's Francis Collins. And what that means is essentially the work that we do is to help enable him to do his job better. And one of the most rewarding things that I did was, my background is in microbiology, so I was placed in a division that focused on biosafety and biosecurity issues. And at the time of my fellowship, I joined kind of at the tail end of a years-long process, a government process of how to develop a federal-wide policy on how to fund research that might have biosecurity implications, such so-called gain-of-function research on pathogens that might have a pandemic potential. And so I joined when the OSTP was leading a government-wide effort for all federal agencies that fund science in any way, and how to set guidelines or guardrails on how to review this research, what are the criteria for funding, and how can scientists who get this funding act responsibly as they're reporting their results on this specific type of research. And so as an NIH employee, my job was to provide the NIH perspective into this government-wide policy development process. And then once that was passed, then work to develop HHS's own individual policy. So that was actually really rewarding and fun experience.
Great, thank you each for sharing a little bit about your backgrounds and those examples of your contributions. And thank you to the audience for putting in some questions. We'll now move on to the first question from the audience. So one of our attendees wrote in, I noticed that influencing policy has become a necessary component of the doctoral process. Can you talk us through your own experience as an idea became a policy and can you take us through your own experience as an idea became a policy and the policy impacted the target population as expected, and how you tweaked the policy if adjustments were needed?
I can try to start, and I'm going to focus on my my fellowship year, because I can, at least in my doctoral work, basic science research on bacteria, and quite honestly, the work didn't have a policy angle to it, so I'll limit my comments to my work at the NIH, which obviously does start with some research that raises policy questions, and then we at the NIH had to kind of answer that question, and so the opportunity that I described about the policy making really stemmed from, if you remember, I'm now blanking on the year, but this was the pandemic potential for the pandemic flu, and there was certain gain of function research where a researcher had shown that certain mutations allow the bird flu basically to be transmissible between ferrets. And there was a question, should we be publishing this research that shows how to make a potentially pandemic flu virus more transmissible? And so this sparked off a years-long process. And so there's research, there's a question on how to do this safely. I think we agree that basic research is necessary, and how, if you want to prevent or stop a pandemic, you need to understand how the virus or the pathogen works. And so there's a recognition that we need this science, but how do we do it safely? Especially from at the federal government, a US-centric, a national security perspective as well. And so research sparked a question. Then this set off a years-long process where the government used scientific experts through FACA committees, federal advisory committees, focused on biosecurity to answer this question. They provided recommendations to the federal government, of which OSTP set off this process that I described earlier. And then as an NIH representative, the mission, you're representing your agency's mission in any of these discussions. And NIH's mission is to conduct research, both basic and translational, to better human lives, prevent human disease, cure human disease. And so at the core of any of the policy development was aimed at ensuring that any of the policies didn't hamper the ability for the NIH to fund critical, innovative research. And so you're always looking through that lens as you're developing a policy, because the idea of the policy is to set kind of guardrails and limitations on how to do this safely. And you don't want to do something that would chill research or actually have the opposite effect of preventing the next pandemic. And so that's an example of like research to policy, and then how as a fellow I was able to participate in that.
I can add a little bit to that. I'll say it's a similar process, but maybe same kind of process, but maybe different subject matter. For there's a need, or someone says there's an idea that comes up. So for me, always thinking about being at NSF, they're thinking about STEM education in the public. One activity that we were included in, our team was included in, was the White House developing the new strategic plan for America's strategy for STEM education. And so looking back and reviewing my year, I'm always thinking, oh, we always had people flying in, and how could we take care of that in a couple of weeks? But at some point during the year, we had about 3 or 4 representatives from each state that the governor selected, that were either education experts or industry experts, who were thinking about where are the gaps in STEM education and what can we be doing in order to create the STEM, it's called Charting a Course for Success, America's Strategy for STEM Education. And that was developed and put out, the report was put out by the Office of Science and Tech Policy in 2018. But those groups of people came in over a course of 2 days and had talks in different groups. And I was the one taking down all the Post-it notes to write down all of the notes, from that convening. Then it went over to a group of writers to continue to write and develop and give feedback. There were advisory groups and education panels and federal advisory groups around STEM education that also got to reflect on what was written in order for that document to then be published, or the report to be published. And definitely a part of that, once that report is published, is how do you then get that to teachers to say, we want this to be the chart for success for STEM education. So what's the marketing idea behind it in order to actually have it implemented? And that was a continuing conversation that I didn't get to finish because I left the fellowship in early 2019. But that was definitely seeing from a really summer 2018, everybody flying in and starting the writing happening and the report being published in December. And it's starting to say, how do we then get people to actually implement this strategic plan across for all STEM education and students in early 2019. So that was really helpful for me to see as well.
Andrea, do you want to offer anything? Or we can move on to an additional question.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to it.
Okay, well, I have a that's great. Well, I have a question from the audience for you, and then a more broader one for Faith and Esteban. So for Andrea, one of our attendees know that you're back in an academic position now. So we were wondering if you found that transition difficult, or how you positioned your time as an STPF fellow on your way to an academic research career. And then for Esteban and Faith, if you could talk about how your fellowship experience influenced your next career steps, I think that those might be nice companion questions.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, going into the fellowship, I was not planning on necessarily going back to academia, but I hadn't closed that door either. I just wasn't sure what my next step was going to be. And I've always had this sort of strong interest in neuroethics and public policy. And so this was a really good fit for me for the year. But I guess in the lead up to that, I basically collected data until the day I moved to DC, which was August 28th or something. And then which required a cross-country drive, so that was fun. But then I sat on that data for a year and did nothing. But I, thought about it, and I still attended SFN and other, I stayed in touch with my colleagues and so forth. And then, I don't know, I worked on improving like my data science and coding skills, things like that. I was still, doing this cool project that's related to neuroscience, but has this policy angle. And there's a lot of universities that sort of, while it's like publishing and, your research chops that get you a faculty job, like anything else you can add to the mix is definitely, like respected and appreciated. So I guess like when I was writing my, and then after the fellowship, I went, I took another postdoc position. And then because I just really missed like the creative side of research. And so it was with like my old postdoc supervisor. So there wasn't like a learning curve. I just like jumped back in, did a bunch of experiments, started faculty job applications like immediately in that first round. So it was, pretty quick, I guess. And then, I guess the way I talked about the fellowship in all of those applications was that I had taken this time to explore this area. I was able to now bring a science policy interest, like I could talk about neuroethics, talk about bioethics, talk about public policy and like STEM crossover, how like I could bring that kind of course to any university. I could provide outreach to other groups within the university, like related to these topics. And then I could, and then I also talked a lot about data science and how to communicate science to a broad audience, and that I could also teach R and Python and things like that. So that's I don't know, sort of how I spun it all, and was lucky enough to get interviews and a job right before the pandemic. So, yeah.
And then, Esteban or Faith, if you want to talk about, how the fellowship experience influenced your next career steps, that'd be great to hear.
I can jump in. For me, the fellowship directly filled in some, gaps on my resume, some skill sets that I hadn't had. That were incredibly important for getting my next job and making me the ideal candidate. And it might not sound interesting, but honestly, one of the biggest skills that I learned was, kind of committee management, because a lot of the policymaking process involves working groups and committees, and someone has to lead those groups, and it also involves consensus building and being diplomatic and working through conflict. And so at the NIH, I had the opportunity to do that for an internal NIH working group that was developing policy just for the NIH itself. And that directly allowed me to get my next job, because the next job was at pharma, again, policy development, and the bread and butter there is through working groups. And so I directly benefited, and absolutely would do it all over again.
I'll say the same thing. I don't think I would have my current position if I didn't do the fellowship. I was on a STEM education and outreach kind of pathway to begin with. While I was in graduate school, I taught middle school with a nonprofit. I was coming from MIT, working at their museum and doing STEM education and outreach. So definitely doing a lot of working with the researchers there to talk about how we could put programming in place for the general public, especially middle and high school students, that would make STEM accessible and their research accessible. So when I started looking for jobs again, this position popped up, which was working under government and community relations here at a Department of Energy National Laboratory, which is Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California. And so it had all of my experiences. So I'm doing community outreach, I'm developing curriculum based on mission science that's done here at the laboratory, as well as making sure that we're thinking about how we are engaging, on a broader level across all of the national laboratories in terms of STEM education. So I report to our executive director for federal relations, and he's thinking about appropriations not only for supporting the research that's here at the laboratory, but also how can we expand funding for STEM education and work-based learning opportunities within the complex of the Department of Energy. So having that knowledge of when someone says here's appropriations and here's a bill came out or amendment came out, or what kind of language is going into certain things, or what kind of policy updates are happening across the government for certain initiatives. I spent that year, and I understand even from just saying there's a program director at DOE and they're putting out a call for a white paper, or they're putting out a call for soliciting for a future grant or a funding opportunity is coming out. Even just knowing the alphabet soup, that is the government was especially important. And so having the time in DC and having the time at a federal agency, I think definitely put me over the top. And as Andrea and as Stefan has said, having that mishmash of the background of, hey, I got the education, the outreach, the science communication, the science background, and now I have the government and policy experience as well. So that all came together and made me a top candidate for the position, and was one of the first jobs I applied to in the fellowship and got, and it's been a great experience since then.
Can I just add one thing I forgot to say?
Please,
the other thing that I think the fellowship gave me was this like confidence that there are things outside of academia, and that it was like, yeah, like that. Like I was just sort of like, I don't need you, academia. I can do whatever I want. But also maybe I want a faculty job. So like, but it did kind of give me this like, I can walk away from this and that's fine too, kind of confidence, and it let me be a lot more courageous in my like research statements and those like application packagey kind of things. And I know that in the job that I took, that's like very valued, like that I kind of push boundaries in ways that I probably wouldn't have because I think like, like some, grad school and postdocs, they can get you down.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks to each of you for responses there. So next question, kind of actually speaks to the whole, expanding horizons thing. So on balance, did you find the intellectual and practical shift from, quote, doing science to, quote, doing policy to be freeing, restrictive, and would there be any advice on how to, handle that shift professionally?
I'll start. I'm going to say that things can kind of move slow in the government. And there are a lot of rules rules for engagement, I'll say, in terms of just, how things are prepared, how memos are prepared, how they're sent up, who they're sent up to, who has to sign off on it. For that, I'll just say, yeah, there was a bit of a learning curve in terms of, this is how things are moving. It's the reason why it does take a long time for things to get out to the public, or policy to get implemented. And so that's a big thing that, everyone will, learn if you're a part of the fellowship, is that you're coming in and you're probably there for, 12 months to maybe, 2 years. And you're going to leave. And there are people there who have been there for 25 plus years, who have been through multiple administrations, and you are going to, some of them are previous scientists. NSF has tons of not always a scientist, but previous professors and full-time researchers. And so they will, know and understand what happens from administration to administration and how things are pushed through. And that can be frustrating. But also you're learning that backside of things. And so it is you know, opening up your mind to, oh, this is why things don't change so quickly, or this is why this was actually implemented, or this is why that compromise happened, or that we have a continuing resolution every year and we really don't have a budget. So things like that, you know, what happens during a government shutdown? Oh, the federal employees have to go home. You know, you'll learn about all of those things that happen behind the scenes that we don't normally get an opportunity to see. And that can be, it's very eye-opening. And I think it allows you to be, again, creative when you step out of that space and you see it. But for those who may be doing the fellowship in the next year, I say don't get frustrated, you know, take it as a learning opportunity, because it can be kind of slow at some points, but I think no, it's done purposeful for certain reasons. Because if you can change everything really quickly, you really do change the whole government in ways that can be irreparable if they're allowed to just, if someone's allowed to just sign off on things too quickly.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. My boss at the NIH, when talking about slowness or process or bureaucracy, would often say, it's not a flaw, it's a feature. Like it's designed that way, which, you know, it's up to you to decide whether that works for you or not. My transition, at least, you know, thinking from like research science-based, you know, thinking about infectious diseases to a policy, you know, as opposed to in the weeds to 50,000 foot level. My transition was easy, but that was because I did know going into the fellowship that I didn't want to return to research, and I wanted to stay in policy. So, you know, I had a drive and a curiosity, and I just ate it up and really wanted to learn as much as I could. And so I think, you know, there might be a bit of a transition there in the thinking, but I think if you just remain curious, then I think you'll be fine. We've all, you know, by the time you join the fellowship, you will have gotten your PhD, so you're capable of many things. And so, but to echo what Faith said, I do think it can be really challenging to get down with the bureaucracy. I think, and it is done that way for a reason. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it does. And for me, that was the most challenging, and ultimately the reason why I did leave federal service. But that doesn't mean that everyone hates that. Most of the people in my cohort at NIH still work for the federal government, and they love it. I just knew it wasn't a right fit for me. And even knowing that, I would still do it all over again. Absolutely. So yeah, I think maybe getting down with the bureaucracy might be a bit of a change.
Yeah, I'll just briefly echo the same thing. Like pace was definitely a problem for me. Like I just felt like I want to be doing stuff constantly. Like why is this so slow? But at the same time, I had so much freedom during my fellowship that I was able to fill that time with a lot of things that I was interested in, and like my mentor was really great about that, and like would loop me into all kinds of stuff that if I showed any like minor interest in, he would just like be like, okay, well, you're going to the National Academies today. And like, so it worked out well, but I did find like, I was like, this is okay, 6 weeks worth of work, and you want me to spread it out over a year? Okay. So you know, it didn't, in the end, did not really suit me, but it was still a great experience.
And I would just note, you know, coming into this program, we have a long history with a lot of the agencies we work with, and they understand, by and large, they understand that this is a training program, so they don't expect you to be, you know, experts day one. They don't expect you to, you know, be enthusiastic about every aspect of the bureaucracy day one, and they help you along in that. Generally, they help you along in that process. So there's some support structure in there too, and a lot of mentors are sometimes former fellows, which is a really, you know, great asset. So another question from the audience is, what is the soft skill you lean into most during your year of service?
I think for me, because it's my office was a policy development, and of course, it's also internal departments at NIH, but also other federal agencies. So there can be negotiation. That's basically literally what policy development is negotiation. And so reading a room is like incredibly important, not just in policy and probably just your life in general, but that's the one I leaned into the most, is reading a room and trying to understand what someone else's motivation behind whatever they're doing or saying is. And that is incredibly important and something I lean into quite often.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The thing I most had to do where I was like critical that I was able to do it was to convince people to do something I wanted them to do. And so I think I like just in general like leaned into being like enthusiastic and friendly and like just trying to convince you that we're all on the same team, we're all on this side, we want to do this thing that I'm saying that we're doing. So like that skill to like kind of convince people that we're all on a team and to do what I want is a key one.
I guess I'll go to logistics. Spreadsheets are key, timetables and agendas are key. Keeping us on track for, we were doing multiple large scale events with, sometimes hundreds of people. So we all needed to figure out how to communicate very well, how to, keep your cool when certain things are, not happening, or seeing where the gaps are, if there needs to be a sign-in sheet on a table, or, people need to be directed to a new conference room because something else is shut down. So being able to really manage, lots of people and keep calm when you have a lot of things happening at the same time and a lot of wheels turning was a big skill set that was definitely needed for the position.
Great. So going to another question from the audience, and scroll back up. Do you think the experience is different between fellows who are early career or compared to those who are maybe mid-career? And we also have a lot of late career fellows in our program as well. And additionally, how accepting or insular were the career staff to fellows in your agencies?
I'll start. I think the career staff were very welcoming. They were willing to share their stories. Actually, they're willing to tell you why things go so slowly, because they've been there so long and they've seen so many fellows go through their office. So they actually were very welcoming. They're also, they're used to people doing rotations. So basically, people doing a certain amount of time in their office and then leaving to go to another office. So they're used to kind of this transition of people coming in and out, and they definitely are willing to help anyone who comes in and who seems enthusiastic about being a part of the office. And in terms of, I'm sorry, Ryan, that second piece of that was?
It may be hard for panelists to respond fully, but just if you had any thoughts about like how the experience may be different for early career versus mid-career versus late career folks.
Yeah. So, I guess I was 4 years out of my PhD, so still pretty early in terms of just getting out of PhD, but I thought it was helpful for me to have had some space between my PhD and having had another job in between. So it just gave me a lot more of an understanding of like my own time management. What was I going for? Like everyone said, using the time, the free time or the space in order to do some other professional development. So I went and got a evaluation certificate at Georgetown University. I used all of my professional development money to go and do evaluation workshops and evaluation conferences and go take another course because I knew this was another skill set that I wanted to add to my just my docket and my CV of the skill sets I could bring to it, the next position. So I would say I think people who are a little further out just understand a little bit more of what they want to take out of the opportunity, where someone just getting out of grad school, you're recouping. You're trying to just get your bearings, which was what I did in my first job. And so you might not understand exactly what you want to get out of the fellowship explicitly. But that's not a bad thing either, because it leaves you open to so many possibilities.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that. I'm sure that maturity helps in some arenas. I was like Faith, I think I was like 4 years out of my PhD, so, or a little longer than that. But yeah, so I was still like early career, but had like experience working as like a researcher and like having a real job and having to manage people and stuff. So I'm sure that helps, because you get into that like rhythm of like what a work life is. Like, I'm sure it's a little bit of a different transition if you're right out of your PhD. But I can also see benefits if you are later in your career, if you're, especially if you're a faculty member and you want to just get this experience, you can bring like this kind of skill set to a university environment. I can see like great benefit to that. And yeah.
And not much to add for me. The career staff at NIH were incredibly welcoming. I think that speaks to the program's ability to partner with offices that are receptive and have good staff and know what the fellowship is and the people that are coming in. And so the career staff were incredibly welcoming, and wasn't treated any differently other than like, oh, you're a new employee, right? Like, that was kind of the mindset, not like you're a fellow. And as far as, early, mid, late stage career, I'd probably say it's just different. I don't know, easier or harder is the best way to describe it, but just different, probably because of that maturity level and in your goals. You're looking for to get something different out of the fellowship, and that's actually the beauty of it. It can provide you like so many different things, and you may have a different perspective the further you are into your career.
Yeah, and I would just briefly add that as a program, having fellows from a diverse set of career stages is something we really value, because it brings a lot to the actual fellowship cohort, and there's a lot of fellow-to-fellow learning and exchanges that happen. So having people from different career stages is definitely something we are very keen on having in each cohort. So yeah, just to keep it moving on to another question, we have one specific for the judicial branch. So Andrea, this one's for you. So one attendee asked, did you have any legal training before your STPF fellowship? And how did you approach problems on your job differently than your colleagues with a JD?
Yeah, so I don't have a JD, but like a keen legal interest, I guess. And I made sure that was apparent on my application. Like, I've taken law courses. I'm trying to think what else I've done. I was part of like the neuroethics society, so like did a lot of reading in that space. I'm trying to think what else was actually on my CV, but like I was like very fluent in the language, I would say, is like a key thing, and was able to like write about it and I think communicate well, like how like my skill set matched up within like the legal world, and like why it's important for judges and lawyers and court employees to like understand key aspects of different areas of science. And I like in my application specifically, I know I talked about like these are like the key areas that I see science being important in the judicial system right now. And I like talked about those and talked about like how that could be addressed. That's my only legal training, I guess. But yeah, I think like you can't just wing it. And they, as far as like how the other people like treated me in the office, there were a number of JDs, a number of PhDs, some PhDs, and then like some JD PhDs. But I was the only person with a PhD in like a biological science. Everybody else was in like sort of poli-sci, or there's a biostats person, but yeah, or psychology. Yeah, it was they loved me. I mean like not my, I don't mean like my personality. I mean hopefully, but they like liked the fact that I had a degree in neuroscience, and like didn't like it never came up that like this is weird that you don't have a JD. It was more like they brought me in to I met like a number of federal judges. They would just drop Supreme Court judgments on my desk and be like, you might be interested in this. So there was like never an assumption that I didn't have like the like intellectual ability to understand what they understood. I was always treated like a peer, not a trainee or something.
Great, thank you for that. So this is potentially, you know, I think we're nearing the end of our time, so maybe this could be kind of quick responses for this, but I was wondering if any of the panelists can offer their thoughts on if fellows can gain supervisory or management experience as a fellow. I know, Esteban, you talked about like working groups and sharing those, but if any of you panelists have any thoughts.
I mean, managing like a direct report, in that sense, I don't think so. I'm not sure that's what the fellowship envisions, because you're there to learn, but that doesn't mean there can't be, like, each office is unique and there might be a situation, like, who knows if they also have an intern, you know, at the same time, and like maybe you might gain some responsibility, but those things are a little unpredictable. And I don't know if I would stake my choosing my office on that, because it's just something you can't plan for, something that graded happens. But as far as managing people in a team setting, or, you know, that is certainly something you do have opportunities for. Again, it is office dependent. If your office doesn't manage work groups, then of course you're not going to have the opportunity. But like in that sense, I do think there can be those opportunities, and it's something that you want. Just be upfront if you know, make it to finalist stage and you're talking to offices, just ask, you know, and then of course there's Ryan always there to help you as well.
I'd say another piece of that is you can form that within the fellows as well. So one was, you know, when you go to being your second year, there are first years who are looking for, you know, guidance and help. And so, you know, you have a little bit of that, not supervising or managing them, but just helping them to navigate, you know, especially if they're being added to your office. The second piece of that is different fellows, especially within talking for NSF, took leadership positions in within, you know, they wanted to bring us together. So certain people took on the roles of how can I make sure that we're all coming together, you know, once a month or quarterly, and could we, you know, there were certain people who decided to take on the challenge of when we did meet with the director, you know, engaging everyone to, you know, create questions and making sure that meeting went well, and making sure it got set up every single year so that we had time with the director of NSF. As well, we put together an evaluation group because we all wanted to put together a project around evaluating some specific programs and looking at impact over a certain amount of time. And so a few of us put together the working group, but, you know, I and another fellow, we took on managing, you know, when do we meet? What are our deliverables? When do we want to, you know, get feedback? So there are those opportunities that you can create within the fellowship, where it's not necessarily something that somebody says, like, this is within even your direct responsibilities for your fellowship. It can be, I want more experience in this specific space. And so we're going to create something that allows us to put something together that gives me the opportunity to flex those skills or to learn how to go about managing or being a supervisor, or just which we all, I think, have found. There's a lot of working groups. I join them all the time. And somebody has to push through and get those working groups to actually get something out the door besides just meeting all the time. And so there are lots of opportunities to do that.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, in the judicial fellowship, it's a pretty flat organization. So in terms of like managing people, like it's unlikely, I would say. But like managing a project, it's like absolutely, like it'll be you managing it. I mean, I've worked with other people occasionally, but yeah, like I had full creative control over whatever I did, so it was great in that way.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we've come up close to the end of our hour together. So to close us out, I just have one more question for our panelist. And it's, so if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to yourself at the time that you applied for the fellowship?
I think my application went in, 5 days before the 2016 election. So I think I say don't do anything different. Be optimistic, and it's going to be an interesting 2 years.
I would probably have told myself to just relax like a tiny bit. I'm like a naturally like pretty anxious type of person. It's like how I gear up for anything is to like really crank up the anxiety as well. So it would, you know, I'm working on a grant right now, and so I'm living that life right now. But yeah, I would just, you know, relax. You don't have to read it a million times, but you can just make sure there are no spelling errors and like Control F for anything that if you're submitting to 2 different branches, don't submit them to the wrong one, that kind of thing. But
Yeah, I think that that is key. That don't mix up the branches, because you can that, because I'm like, I looking back on some of mine, I'm like, did I make that mistake? So anyway, applying, I would say, talk to more former fellows. I did talk to a few. Actually, I think I just talked to one. And that was helpful. Clearly, I was accepted into the program, but I think talking to more fellows to find out, what you want, how to craft your statement. I think the statement is key. Like, you've done your scientific work. That's, that is your work. And so I think understanding the fellowship more so that you can craft a great statement to really show someone in writing, and however many pages it is, but it's not many, why you're interested in this and why they should pick you. And so I think talking to more former fellows is really important to get a better handle on that.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Faith, Andrea, and Esteban for the great insight and perspective on the fellowship and on their fellowship experiences. Thank you so much for responding to all those questions, and I hope all attendees are doing a virtual round of applause across the world for our panel. So yeah, thank you to each of you for making the time today. So I think we're just going to move to a quick wrap up. So again, thank you to the attendees for coming, and thank you for all your great questions. I thought they were really, really engaging. As a reminder, the application is open through November 1st. Please visit our website to read more about the program, and we'll also send you a recording of this chat in the coming days. The next chat in our series is July 15th. It'll be the second in this 2-part series, which is what it's like to be a fellow, and the second chat will focus on a year of learning. If we couldn't get to your question today, please feel free to email fellowships@AAAS.org, and we'll try to continue the conversation there. But thank you again for attending. Thank you again for our panelists, and we hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks all. Bye.
thank you.